The Zarvon warship hung in low orbit over Helios-4, an ugly mass of blackened metal and glowing plasma vents. The sky over Fort Independence, the planet's lone military outpost, burned crimson from its thrusters. It wasn't the first time Captain Roy Tanner had seen an alien warship up close, but it was the first time he had a look at one knowing no reinforcements were coming. "Big son of a bitch," muttered Corporal Billy Tex McGraw, adjusting his boonie hat. "Almost pretty in a we're all screwed kind of way." "Cut the chatter," Tanner said, though he agreed. The men stood on the fort's outer wall, a makeshift defense line of reinforced metal and auto turrets, nothing that could withstand a full orbital bombardment. A Zarvon shuttle detached from the mothership, slicing through the air with unnatural silence. It touched down in the clearing beyond the base, and the ramp extended. Out stepped a towering Zarvon officer, its obsidian armor adorned with jagged silver etchings. Eyes like molten gold swept over the human defenders. The translator on its chest crackled to life. "I am Commander HFY Crawl of the Zarvon Empire. You are now subjects of the Imperial Dominion. Surrender your weapons and kneel." Tanner didn't move. His men remained still beside him. Sergeant Dante Washington rested his hand on the grip of his rifle. Lieutenant Jose Ramirez stood with his arms crossed, face unreadable. Private Marcus, Detroit's king, youngest of them all, shifted slightly, his fingers twitching near the comm unit on his wrist. HFY Crawl's mandibles flexed. "You hesitate because you believe you have a choice. You do not. You are insignificant. Your weapons are archaic, your tactics primitive. The Dominion has conquered species who mastered war before your kind even left its homeworld. The only thing humans excel at is dying quickly." McGraw snorted. "That a fact?" "It is a certainty," HFY Crawl said. "Your kind has no honor. You lack the courage for true battle. You rely on crude machines and explosives instead of facing death with dignity." Tanner exhaled slowly. He dealt with arrogant brass before, but never one with tusks. The Zarvon weren't here to negotiate. They were here to humiliate. "Sergeant," he said, keeping his eyes locked on HFY Crawl. Washington grinned. "Sir, show the good commander what we think of his offer." Washington raised his rifle and fired. The shot struck the ground inches from HFY Crawl's clawed feet. Dust exploded into the air. The Zarvon guards tensed, but the commander held up a hand, stopping them. He didn't flinch. "Predictable," HFY Crawl said, voice dripping with amusement. "You lash out because you are afraid, but fear will not save you. You have one cycle to submit, or your colony will be reduced to ash." The translator clicked off. The commander turned and walked back to the shuttle, his guards following. In moments, they were gone, vanishing into the sky. Tanner finally let out the breath he'd been holding. "That went well," King muttered. Ramirez shook his head. "They're testing us, seeing if we'll break before they have to waste effort crushing us. They think we're cowards," Washington said, flexing his fingers. "That's gonna cost em." Tanner agreed. The Zarvon saw the universe in terms of strength and weakness. Humanity, to them, was weak. But if there was one thing humans had always done well, it was proving people wrong. "One cycle," he said, glancing at the men. "That's about 10 hours. Plenty of time," Washington said. Tanner nodded. "Ramirez, you, and King get into their comms. I want to know every damn thing they're saying up there. McGraw, start rigging the perimeter with whatever we've got left. Washington, inventory weapons. Find out how much bang we can still throw." "And what are you going to do, Cap?" McGraw asked. Tanner looked at the sky, where the Zarvon ship loomed like a vulture. "Figure out how we turn this fight into a massacre." The jungle swallowed them whole. Thick, waxy leaves dripped condensation as heat and humidity pressed against their skin. Every breath tasted of damp earth and rot. The Marines moved in silence, their boots finding purchase on the uneven terrain. They had abandoned Fort Independence 3 hours ago, leaving behind only traps and ghosts. Now, deep within Helios-4's wilderness, they prepared for war on their own terms. Tanner crouched near an outcrop of stone, scanning the canopy. He could still see the glow of the Zarvan warship hovering in the distance, its presence a constant reminder of what was coming. He clicked his radio twice. His men froze. A faint hum cut through the jungle's natural sounds. An alien patrol, moving fast. Ramirez gestured with 2 fingers. 5 hostiles. Close. Tanner tapped Washington's shoulder. The sergeant unlatched the prototype launcher strapped to his back, a heavily modified MRL-77. The standard multi-rocket launcher was a relic by Zarvan standards, bulky, mechanical, devoid of energy-based sophistication. But Washington had spent the last 2 hours stripping it down and rebuilding it with a payload meant to tear through enemy armor. Tanner nodded. Washington took aim. The first rocket spiraled into the trees, detonating in a controlled blast of shrapnel and white phosphorus. Screams erupted. The second shot followed a heartbeat later, slamming into something metallic. The explosion sent a ripple through the jungle. Move, Tanner ordered. They pushed forward, weapons raised, navigating through shattered foliage. A Zarvan trooper twitched on the ground, his armor eaten away by phosphorus. Another lay against a tree, half his torso missing. Ramirez knelt, examining a blackened heap. That was a scout drone, he murmured. They're adapting. Not fast enough, Washington muttered. Then we keep them guessing, Tanner said. They moved deeper into the jungle, toward a ravine that Ramirez had identified as a choke point. If the Zarvan wanted to sweep the planet, they would have to come through here. The humans intended to make that costly. McGraw knelt by a pile of salvage materials, fitting together the last components of an improvised explosive. This should turn any lizard dumb enough to walk through into confetti. King worked beside him, fingers dancing across his comm device. Tapped into their relay. They know we're in the jungle, but they're blind in here. They're spreading out, trying to pin us down. Let them, Tanner said. They spent the next hour setting traps, tripwire explosives, pressure mines, deadfall spikes. The Zarvan relied on overwhelming force, not subtlety. The humans would use that arrogance against them. The first wave arrived just before dusk. It started with a low-frequency pulse, a disruption wave meant to disable human tech. King grinned. They don't know we're running analog. Then came the soldiers, black-armored figures moving with unnatural grace, plasma rifles glowing in the twilight. The first hit a tripwire. The explosion ripped through his squad, sending bodies flying. The survivors hesitated, just long enough for Washington to fire the modified launcher. The rockets streaked through the air, then split apart, 3 smaller warheads twisting mid-flight, each seeking heat signatures. The impact was instant carnage. Gunfire erupted. The Marines moved through the underbrush like ghosts, striking from cover, then fading back into the foliage. McGraw lobbed a grenade, its shockwave sending 2 Zarvan tumbling into the ravine. Tanner took down a soldier at close range, his rifle spitting control bursts. The Zarvan fought back, their plasma cutting through the trees, but the jungle was not theirs. It belonged to the humans now. Minutes stretched into eternity. The enemy fell back. Smoke curled through the branches. The ground was littered with their dead. Tanner wiped sweat from his face. Status: 1 grazed, Ramirez reported, gesturing at King, whose arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage. Otherwise, we're breathing. Washington kicked over a Zarvan corpse, studying the armor. They won't keep making the same mistakes. They don't have to, King said grimly, holding up his device. They're calling in air support. Tanner looked to the sky. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The first sign of trouble was the unnatural silence. No insects, no rustling leaves, just an eerie stillness pressing down on the jungle. Tanner signaled his men to take cover, and they melted into the underbrush, rifles raised. Then came the drones. Sleek, obsidian black, they moved in near-perfect synchronization, scanning the jungle with flickering red optics. They glided just above the treetops, their motion eerily smooth. A low hum followed them, the sound of anti-gravity engines displacing air. They weren't searching. They were mapping. Ramirez adjusted his visor. They're not blind anymore. They're marking our positions, feeding data back to their main force. Tanner's jaw tightened. The Zarvan had learned. The last battle had cost them, but they were adapting. Human unpredictability had given them an edge so far, but if the enemy turned this into a numbers game, brute force would win. They needed to stay ahead. McGraw crouched beside him, stuffing C4 into a hollowed-out tree trunk. "So what's the plan, Cap?" "Can't outgun M, but we can still out-crazy M." Tanner glanced at King, who was tapping furiously at his comm unit. "How deep into their network are you?" "Enough to hear them screaming about how much they hate us," King muttered. "They're pissed. Command's calling this a vermin infestation. They want it over tonight." Tanner thought fast. "If they think we're vermin, let's show M how rats fight. Get into their targeting system. Feed them bad data. Make them think we're moving where we're not." King grinned. "Oh, I like that." As King worked, Ramirez laid out their next move. "They're going to sweep the jungle with incendiary strikes. Push us into the open where they can pick us off." Washington grunted. "Then we make sure they don't like what they find." They scattered, setting up a network of false trails. Heat decoys, broken branches, gear left behind in places the enemy would expect a retreat. Then they positioned themselves along the most likely approach, where the jungle funneled into a narrow pass. Minutes passed. Then the sky ignited. Bright streaks of plasma rained down, setting the canopy ablaze. Smoke choked the air, thick and acrid. The drones, fooled by King's interference, fired into empty clearings, torching sections of jungle where no humans stood. The Zarvan ground forces advanced in perfect formations, weapons humming. And then the jungle fought back. A tripwire detonated, sending a wall of flame roaring into the enemy's front ranks. Plasma-resistant mesh nets, hidden in the trees, snapped loose, entangling soldiers in their own fires. The moment confusion set in, the Marines opened fire. McGraw's modified explosives sent a wave of concussive force through the valley. Washington's launcher unleashed a payload of cluster munitions, each warhead splitting into smaller bursts that rained shrapnel in every direction. The Zarvan, trained for open battle, struggled in the chaos. Tanner took down 2 soldiers before they even registered where he was. Ramirez moved with precision, every shot finding a weak point in the enemy's armor. The Zarvan panicked. Their formation crumbled as they pushed forward blindly, trying to escape the carnage. That was when they walked into the second trap. Tanner pressed the detonator. The ravine walls, lined with McGraw's explosives, erupted. Trees splintered, rock shattered, and an avalanche of debris buried the advancing soldiers. For the first time, the Zarvan broke. Those who weren't dead or trapped turned and ran, retreating into the firelit jungle. King, still tapping into their comms, loud a low whistle. Their commander's losing his mind. Says humans aren't fighting honorably. Says we fight like demons. McGraw spat. Demons? Nah, man. We just fight like Americans. The battlefield lay silent. The jungle burned, but the war was far from over. They had won this fight, but the Zarvan weren't done yet. Tanner looked up at the sky, where the warship loomed, its engines flaring. The final battle was coming. The ground trembled beneath them as the Zarvan warship descended, its thrusters kicking up a storm of dust and ash. The jungle, once thick and suffocating, had been reduced to smoldering ruins. Smoke curled into the night sky, mixing with the blood-stained air. Helios 4 had become a graveyard, but the war wasn't over. The Zarvan had abandoned subtlety. They were done with patrols and drones, done with precision strikes and encirclements. Now they were coming to end this with brute force. Tanner tightened his grip on his rifle, watching the enemy deploy. The remaining Zarvan warriors moved with mechanical efficiency, their silver-plated armor gleaming in the glow of their ship's underbelly. Towering mechs, their frames bristling with plasma cannons, stomped through the wreckage. And at the center of it all, Standing at the forefront like a conqueror was Commander HFY Crawl. His molten eyes burned with fury. Enough of this cowardice. His voice boomed through the translator. You have no more shadows to hide in. No more tricks to play. Face your extinction with dignity. Washington cracked his knuckles, shouldering the multi-rocket launcher. Dignity. Man, we gave that up when you called us cowards. McGraw lit a cigar with a piece of smoldering debris. And now we're about to introduce you to a good old American ass-kicking. Ramirez surveyed the battlefield, his mind calculating the angles. They think we're out of options. They always do, Tanner said. Until we prove 'em wrong. The Marines had spent the last few hours preparing for this moment. Every remaining explosive, every salvage piece of Zarvon tech, every ounce of human ingenuity had been funneled into a single weapon. Washington's modified launcher, once a simple MRL-77, had become something else entirely. The first shot was for the Mechs. The launcher's payload split mid-flight, unleashing a swarm of high-speed projectiles, each tipped with scavenged Zarvon disruptor tech. The warheads hit like thunder, sending arcs of crackling blue energy dancing over the Mechs' exoskeletons. The towering machines seized, their internal systems shorting out, before collapsing like felled trees. The second shot was for the infantry. A cluster of micro-rockets rained down in controlled bursts, shredding through alien ranks. The surviving warriors charged, plasma bolts ripping through the air, but the Marines were already moving. McGraw lobbed a satchel charge, sending another fireball roaring skyward. Ramirez took out a flanking unit with surgical precision. King, still wired into the Zarvon systems, jammed their targeting, turning their own weapons against them. Tanner moved through the chaos like a ghost, his rifle barking death. The Zarvon had expected a broken resistance, a final desperate stand. Instead, they had walked into something far worse. HFY Crawl roared in rage, drawing a wickedly curved plasma blade. He cut through the wreckage, marching straight for Tanner. You cannot win, he bellowed. You are filth. You are. Tanner raised his pistol and shot him in the throat. The alien commander staggered, clutching at the smoking hole where his voice had once been. His molten eyes dimmed. He dropped to his knees. Tanner lowered the gun. And you talk too much. HFY Crawl collapsed. The remaining Zarvon hesitated. Their leader was dead. Their warship, hovering above, was their last refuge. But before they could retreat, King spoke, his voice laced with satisfaction. They just got a message from their homeworld, he said. Our distress signal finally went through. Ramirez smirked. And Earth sent a reply. King grinned, holding up his comm unit. Fleet's on the way. The Zarvon faltered. Then, for the first time, they ran. The Marines stood amidst the wreckage, bloodied, burned but unbroken. Tanner exhaled slowly, watching the last of the enemy retreat. Washington slung the launcher over his shoulder. So, Cap, they still think we're cowards. Tanner looked at the devastation, at the warship lifting off in full retreat, at the bodies of an enemy that had underestimated them. No, he said. I think they'll be telling stories about us for a long, long time,